Robert De Niro told Trevor Noah to go back to his country. It happened on a Wednesday evening, live taping, audience full, lights perfectly warm, the kind of night where everything was supposed to run smooth. Two professionals meeting at the apex of late-night calm, one legend, one sharp-witted host, no alarms, just entertainment. De Niro came out in a tailored dark jacket, expression unreadable, half smiling, the way he always does when he knows cameras are watching, but his thoughts are already somewhere else. Trevor greeted him with that familiar mix of charm and slight mischief, clearly excited to have him on. They exchanged the usual pleasantries. The crowd clapped, a few chuckles here and there, but then somewhere midway into their sit-down, after the opening banter faded and the interview dug a bit deeper, Trevor casually asked, "Where exactly were you born, Robert?" It was a harmless question, or so it seemed, the kind of question he asked dozens of guests before, just a springboard into a funny childhood anecdote or some neighborhood memory. But De Niro's smile dropped just slightly, like something flicked off behind the eyes, and he leaned back, voice steady but flat. "That's not important." The audience stayed quiet, maybe thinking it was a setup for a joke. Trevor blinked, then smiled again, easing the tone. "I just like knowing where people come from." Adds context. That's when De Niro, with a shrug that felt too slow to be casual, said, "Well, I know where you come from, and honestly, I don't think you belong here." A strange silence filled the studio. Not shock, not laughter, just the sound of people trying to process if they heard what they thought they heard. Trevor didn't laugh. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but confusion, as if maybe he misunderstood. "Sorry," he said, still keeping his composure. De Niro repeated it, clearer this time. "Go back to your country." No punchline, no smirk, no rescue from irony. Just words, old and heavy, dropped in the center of a space where they didn't belong. For a beat, Trevor didn't speak. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He turned his head just enough to glance toward his producers in the shadows, then back at De Niro. "What did you just say?" he asked, more to confirm than confront. De Niro's face was unreadable, and now the crowd was holding their breath. Not out of offense yet, but disbelief. De Niro doubled down. "You heard me," he said. "You're good at what you do, but this isn't your place. You weren't born here. This isn't home for you." There was no laughter, no music cue, just the weight of the moment as Trevor sat back, stiff, hands clenched just slightly in his lap. He took a breath, glanced down, then up again, this time directly at De Niro. "You really want to do this here?" he asked. And that was the first moment it turned. The first hint that something bigger had just cracked open. De Niro didn't back off, but something in his expression shifted, as if he realized too late that the air in the room had changed and there was no way to rewind it. Trevor didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand up. But what followed was the kind of silence that builds into a story people remember years later. The kind of silence that comes right before something splits. The kind of silence where an audience collectively understands that whatever happens next, it's not going to be what they expected when they tuned in. Trevor stared at De Niro for a long second, a quiet, stunned pause hanging in the studio like the air had been vacuumed out. And for a moment he blinked twice and leaned slightly forward, unsure if this was some layered joke or obscure callback he had missed, trying to place it in a context that would make it make sense. Then asked slowly, cautiously, "Why would you say that?" His tone wasn't angry yet. It was more the voice of someone trying to rescue a moment before it tips over, someone hoping the other person would take it back, explain it away, say he meant something else, say it was sarcasm or tiredness or just a joke gone wrong. But De Niro didn't blink, didn't smile, just looked at him with an oddly calm stare and said, "Because that's where you come from. That's your place. That's your country. You don't belong here, Trevor." It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, and it landed with a kind of coldness that didn't need volume to burn. And that's when Trevor's expression changed. Not like he'd been insulted, but like he'd been blindsided. The kind of look you get when someone you respected, or at least understood, suddenly says something that unhooks the whole idea you had of them. He drew in a breath through his nose and looked down, just briefly, just to steady the emotion bubbling somewhere in his chest. and then looked up again, his voice lower now, serious. "You're talking about Africa, right?" he asked, not because he needed confirmation, but because he wanted to make De Niro hear it out loud. "That's what you mean?" De Niro didn't nod, didn't deny it. He just sat there with that same half-chiseled stillness he wore in so many of his films, as if this was a role he'd decided to step into. But this wasn't a movie, and Trevor Noah wasn't reading from a script. "What are you allowing yourself to say to me right now?" Trevor continued, voice still level but gaining a blade underneath it, his hands now folded on the desk, not with calm, but with control, the kind you hold on to when your whole body wants to stand up and walk away. The audience had gone completely quiet. Phones were filming now discreetly, red lights blinking from the dark corners of the crowd. "You think I'm not American enough for you? You think because I was born somewhere else I can't belong here?" he asked, not rhetorical but challenging. And De Niro, instead of backing down, leaned forward just slightly, his voice now edged with a gruff insistence that made it clear he wasn't trying to be diplomatic anymore. "I can say whatever the hell I want," he said. "That's the beauty of this country. And if I think something, I'll say it. If it bothers you, maybe you're in the wrong place. Maybe it's you who should stay quiet." The words hit the table between them like stones. Trevor's jaw tensed just briefly, and he looked off to the side again, a muscle twitching near his temple, not from fear, but from restraint. Then he turned slowly, facing De Niro dead on, and his voice when it came was quiet but surgical. "You need to leave," he said, not shouting, not bluffing. "You need to get up and walk out of here before I have to ask security to do it." And it was in that moment that the crowd realized something irreversible had happened. This wasn't a bit, this wasn't rehearsed, and something raw had cracked open between two public figures on live television. De Niro looked around as if suddenly aware of how silent it was, of how many eyes were on him, how many lenses were watching. He stood up slowly, his hands sliding against the edge of the table, like he was bracing himself against something he hadn't meant to provoke. And without saying another word, he turned and walked off stage, the lights casting a long shadow behind him that stretched across the floor like something metaphorical and too real at the same time. Trevor sat still, not looking after him, but down at the cards on his desk, his fingers pressing them together. As the control room scrambled to cut to a commercial, the audience stunned and stiff. What had just happened wasn't planned, wasn't expected, and whatever came next, the press, the reactions, the edited clips, it wouldn't undo the fact that, for the first time in his show's history, Trevor Noah had asked someone to leave, not because of a scandal or a joke gone wrong, but because a line had been crossed in the quietest, most dangerous way, with full intent and no apology. But there was something else behind Trevor's eyes now, something unsaid, something not done yet, and as he finally looked up again, directly into the camera, something in his stare told everyone watching, "This story isn't over. Not yet. Wait, it's worth it." The next day, the internet was still burning with the clip, dissected in every possible frame and caption. And though the show had aired only hours ago, the fallout had already stretched far beyond anything either man could have expected. Opinion pieces, threads, think pieces, endless commentary from people who hadn't even seen it live. Just fragments, out-of-context quotes, guesses and heat. Trevor hadn't commented yet, hadn't posted anything, hadn't smiled for cameras that morning, just arrived at the studio quietly, earlier than usual, walking the long back hallway to his dressing room with the look of someone carrying something too complicated for one sentence. What people didn't see was that around noon, Robert De Niro showed up outside the building. No cameras, no entourage, just him in a plain jacket and dark cap, holding nothing but his phone and a look that was missing all of last night's armor. Security hesitated, unsure what to do, but Trevor had already been told, and without saying much, he nodded and asked them to let him in. What happened next didn't go live, wasn't recorded, wasn't posted, just a quiet moment in the hallway near the side of the stage, where the two men stood facing each other like two sides of a mirror that had shattered the night before. De Niro spoke first, not with an excuse, not with some PR-filtered apology, but something simpler, rawer, I don't know what happened yesterday, he said, voice gravelly, slower than usual. I had a bad day, something just broke in me, and I said things I didn't even realize I believed. Maybe I didn't even believe them. Maybe I just said them to hurt someone. I don't know, but it wasn't right. And I'm sorry. I really am. Trevor didn't say anything right away. He looked at him, really looked at him, like he was trying to measure the weight of the words, see if they were built on truth or just regret. And then, without any grand speech, he stepped forward and hugged him. Not a half hug, not a polite tap, but a full, tight, unscripted embrace. The kind you don't fake. The kind that says, okay, but let's not pretend it didn't happen. It wasn't clean, but it was real. They stood like that for a long moment before pulling apart. And then Trevor, finally smiling just a little, said, "Come on, let's talk. Somewhere without cameras." And so they left, not out the front, not past the press, but through a back door, walked 3 blocks to a quiet little restaurant that Trevor liked, sat at a small table near the window, and just talked. No notes, no handlers, no filters. About comedy, about growing up, about what gets under your skin without you realizing it, about how even legends can get it wrong, about how forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, but it does let you move. Later that evening, the studio was quiet, but they returned together, walked side by side through the same hallway that had felt cold just hours before. This time, Trevor asked the team to let them go live for a few minutes. Not a segment, not a stunt. Just a short, unplanned moment before the scheduled rerun. When they stepped back onto that stage, it was without applause, just presence. De Niro stood there, no makeup, no performance, and faced the cameras with the same calm tone he once used to play the men people feared. "Last night," he said, "I said something that shouldn't have been said. And I want to say this in front of whoever needs to hear it. Trevor Noah is not only one of the most talented comedians and hosts I've ever met, he's also one of the most patient, thoughtful, and strong people I've stood across from. I disrespected him, and I own that, and I respect him deeply." Trevor didn't add much, just nodded, said thank you, and added, "It's easy to break something in a second, harder to fix it in front of people. That's what makes this moment matter." They didn't linger. They didn't milk it, just left the stage together quietly, the room holding that weighty calm that sometimes follows storms. But there was something in the way they walked, side by side now, that hinted this wasn't just an ending. It was the start of something better. Wait, it's worth it.